It was a calm, early Saturday morning, the kind that promised solace and quiet reprieve, the kind Elijah Brooks had long sought ever since his childhood days when he would wander the banks of Lake Shelton with his father, learning to fish, learning to be patient, learning to find peace in the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Now, years later, after countless grueling work weeks navigating the cutthroat tech industry, in the bustling city where the glare of screens and the hum of fluorescent lights had become his constant companions, Elijah treasured these few precious hours by the water, a sacred ritual, a chance to reconnect with simpler times and with himself. As the first rays of sunlight glistened on the lake's mirror-like surface, casting a golden sheen that shimmered like scattered diamonds, he eased his boat backward down the worn wooden ramp, its creak mingling with the distant calls of morning. Birds awakening in the dense canopy of oaks and maples surrounding the lake. The air was crisp yet gentle, carrying the faint scent of pine and fresh earth, a balm to his weary soul. His hands moved deftly, muscles honed by years of handling equipment both on water and in his offices, as he secured the boat, preparing his fishing gear with practiced ease. The lake was his sanctuary, a place untouched by the noise of the world, a pocket of stillness where the only interruptions were the whisper of the breeze or the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. And yet, as Elijah settled onto the wooden dock, settling into a foldable chair with his fishing rod in hand, allowing the rod's line to stretch taut over the water's edge, he felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a disturbance in the serene quiet that was as palpable as it was unwelcome. From the corner of his eye, a figure approached, brisk, purposeful, the very embodiment of intrusion into this peaceful tableau. She was a middle-aged white woman, her posture rigid with a mixture of entitlement and authority, her heels clicking sharply against the gravel path that led from the cluster of suburban homes perched just beyond the tree line. Her sunglasses sat perched atop her carefully styled hair, a clipboard clutched tightly in one hand, as if it were a weapon, and her sandals betrayed an attempt at casualness, though her entire demeanor screamed confrontation. Stopping abruptly, beside the dock, arms crossed and lips pressed in a thin line of displeasure, she fixed Elijah with a sharp gaze, breaking the stillness with her voice, which was brisk and commanding. "Excuse me." Elijah turned slowly, meeting her eyes with a calm that contrasted starkly with her agitation. "Morning," he replied, his tone even and unruffled, a deliberate choice to diffuse whatever tension threatened to spill over. "You can't just put your boat in here," she declared, her voice rising slightly with the certainty of someone who believed rules were on her side. "This is private property. Lake Shelton is part of our HOA community, and only members are allowed access. I'm going to have to ask you to move your boat." Elijah's brow lifted ever so slightly in silent question, his expression remaining composed but alert. "And you are?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with curiosity. "Karen Whitmore," she announced proudly, as though her name alone carried the weight of unquestionable authority. "President of the Lakeview Homeowners Association. I don't recall seeing you at any of our meetings. Are you visiting someone here?" Elijah considered her carefully, noting the sharpness in her eyes, the way her stance radiated control, but also insecurity. "No, just enjoying the lake," he said simply, adjusting his fishing rod with casual ease, deliberately refusing to escalate the confrontation. Karen's lips tightened, a flash of frustration flickering across her face. "That's not how this works," she said, her tone growing more insistent. "If you don't remove your boat, I'll have to call security or the sheriff." Elijah nodded slowly, allowing a small, knowing smile to touch his lips. "You do what you think is best," he replied evenly, his gaze steady, the calm in his voice masking the storm beneath, the years of patience tested by ignorance, the quiet power that lay behind his stillness. The sun continued to rise, casting long shadows across the lake, the gentle sounds of nature swirling around them as the standoff lingered, the clash of entitlement and rightful ownership playing out in the soft morning light, far from the busy streets and neon glare, but no less charged, no less significant. For Elijah, this was more than a simple dispute over property or a boat. It was a moment where respect, history, and dignity collided, a test of character as much as of law, and he was ready. The first light of dawn stretched its golden fingers across the placid surface of Lake Shelton, bathing the water in a warm, shimmering glow that danced like liquid fire beneath the soft caress of the morning breeze. Elijah Brooks sat quietly on the edge of the wooden dock, his hands steady as he prepared his fishing rod, the familiar ritual bringing a meditative calm to his often frenetic life. This lake, nestled in the folds of a sprawling suburban community, had been his refuge since childhood, a place where time slowed, where the noise of the world faded into the gentle whisper of rustling leaves and the distant calls of waking birds. Growing up here, he had learned the language of patience from his father, the rhythms of nature and the unspoken bond between man and water. Those lessons, etched deep into his soul, stood in stark contrast to the relentless pace of his current existence as the CEO of a tech startup, where every second was consumed by deadlines, meetings, and the ceaseless hum of city life. Yet no matter how busy or pressured the week, Elijah made it a point to escape here every weekend, to breathe deeply and reconnect with the essence of who he was before the world demanded otherwise. As the boat gently bobbed beside him, tethered to the dock by a sturdy rope, Elijah allowed his gaze to drift across the lake's glassy expanse, where the mirrored sky reflected fluffy clouds drifting lazily overhead. The scent of pine mingled with fresh earth, carrying with it a nostalgia, so potent it brought a faint smile to his lips. Peace was here in these moments, uncomplicated and pure, but that peace was not to last. A sudden sound disrupted the natural harmony, a sharp crunch of gravel under shoes, the brisk clip-clop of heels against the path leading to the dock. Elijah's keen eyes caught sight of a figure approaching with purpose and an unmistakable air of authority. She was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed despite the casual lakeside setting, with her sun-kissed hair pulled back neatly, sunglasses perched atop her head like a crown of superiority. In her hand, she clutched a clipboard with rigid grip, the pages rustling slightly in the breeze, and her lips were pressed into a thin, determined line. Her stride was measured but forceful, each step punctuated by the metallic tap of her sandals, announcing her arrival like a challenge. As she reached the dock, she stopped abruptly and folded her arms, fixing Elijah with a gaze sharp enough to cut through the morning mist. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and commanding, carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to getting their way. Elijah looked up, returning her stare with calm, unflinching eyes. "Morning," he replied evenly, his voice steady and disarming, a deliberate choice to maintain tranquility despite the brewing storm. "You can't just put your boat in here," she continued, the words spilling out with a mixture of indignation and self-righteousness. "This is private property. Lake Shelton is part of our homeowners association community, and only members are allowed access. I'm going to have to ask you to move your boat." There was a hardness to her voice, an implicit threat lurking beneath the surface, as if she wielded her title like a weapon. Elijah regarded her quietly, his gaze calm but penetrating. "And you are?" he asked, voice low but steady, a hint of challenge woven beneath the surface. "Karen Whitmore," she declared proudly, her chest lifting slightly as if the very mention of her name would settle the dispute. "President of the Lakeview Homeowners Association. I don't recall seeing you at any of our meetings. Are you visiting someone here?" Elijah's eyes narrowed fractionally, not in anger but in silent appraisal. "No," he answered simply. "Just enjoying the lake." His voice was firm, carrying the weight of unspoken history and deeper truth she refused to see. Karen's lips thinned further, frustration flickering briefly across her features. "That's not how this works," she insisted, stepping closer, her tone rising with each word. "If you don't remove your boat, I'll have to call security, or the sheriff." Elijah nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, a smile that held both irony and quiet resolve. "You do what you think is best," he said calmly, his eyes steady and unyielding, signaling the beginning of a confrontation far more complicated than mere property rights. The air between them crackled with tension as the early morning sun climbed higher, casting long, stark shadows that seemed to mirror the growing divide between entitlement and rightful ownership. Karen's phone was already in hand, fingers flying as she summoned reinforcements, calling board members and local authorities with the self-assured urgency of someone convinced she was enforcing justice. Within an hour, 2 board members arrived, their expressions a mix of curiosity and support for Karen's stance, and shortly thereafter, a sheriff's deputy pulled up in a cruiser, his presence adding a new gravity to the unfolding scene. Deputy Rollins approached Elijah with professional neutrality, requesting identification and listening carefully as Elijah provided his credentials, driver's license, proof of residence, and then a legal document few present had seen before. The deed to Lake Shelton itself. The deputy's expression shifted from polite formality to surprise as he reviewed the papers, then glanced up at Karen, who watched anxiously. "Ma'am," he said gently but firmly, "this man is Elijah Brooks. He is the legal owner of Lake Shelton and the surrounding 5 acres. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, shattering the assumptions Karen had long held. Her face paled, disbelief flashing through her eyes as she stammered, "That can't be. The HOA. We've always used this lake." Elijah stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Not legally. My family purchased this land decades ago. Your developer made a deal to allow access, but that agreement expired 5 years ago. I never renewed it." A heavy silence fell. Karen's world shifted beneath her feet as the weight of her ignorance and arrogance settled over the gathered crowd. The fishing club she had proudly led, the meetings she had chaired, the bylaws she had enforced, all suddenly meaningless without his consent. "But our bylaws, our community tradition," she protested weakly, grasping at straws. Elijah shook his head gently. "You've been trespassing for years, but I never cared. Until now." The lake, once a shared haven, was now a battleground for respect and recognition. As Karen's face tightened with rage and humiliation, Elijah turned back to the water. The peace he had sought interrupted but not broken. Here on the edge of the lake he owned, surrounded by nature's quiet beauty, a new chapter was beginning, one that would challenge old power, demand accountability, and redefine who truly belonged. And Elijah was ready. The early morning. Sun spilled its warm golden light across the tranquil surface of Lake Shelton, a jewel of still water, nestled quietly within the lush, tree-lined embrace of the suburban community. Elijah Brooks sat patiently at the edge of the old wooden dock, his hands steady and experienced as he assembled his fishing rod, a familiar ritual that brought a rare and precious sense of calm amid the relentless pressures of his high-powered life. This lake was more than just a body of water to Elijah. It was a sanctuary, a sacred refuge where memories from his childhood mingled with the present moment, a place where the chaos of the city, the demands of his tech empire, and the easy, relentless expectations of modern life melted away beneath the gentle whispers of the wind and the soothing lap of waves against the shore. Growing up in this very community, Elijah had learned the art of patience and respect for nature's rhythms from his father, who had taught him to listen to the water and understand the silence between the bites. These lessons shaped his character, grounding him in humility and perseverance, qualities that had served him well in his rise to success, yet which he never allowed to obscure the simpler joys. On this particular morning, the lake's glassy surface mirrored the vast sky overhead, scattered with fluffy clouds drifting lazily as if time itself had slowed down. The scent of pine and moist earth filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh coffee from nearby homes awakening to the weekend. Elijah breathed deeply, savoring the moment, the line of his fishing rod taut against the gentle tug of the water, his thoughts drifting as freely as the breeze. Here in this quiet pocket of the world he was just a man seeking peace. But the serenity was fragile, vulnerable to the unpredictable currents of human nature. That fragile peace shattered abruptly with the sharp, insistent sound of footsteps on gravel, a stark contrast to the lake's natural harmony. Elijah's eyes flicked to the source, and there she was, a woman with the unmistakable posture of someone used to authority and unquestioned obedience. Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed president of the Lakeview Homeowners Association, approached, with a clipboard clutched tightly in her hand, her face set in a mask of stern determination. Her shoes clicked sharply on the path as she walked purposefully toward the dock, sunglasses perched atop her carefully styled hair like a crown of entitlement. She stopped abruptly beside Elijah, folding her arms and fixing him with a glare. That seemed designed to intimidate. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice cutting through the tranquil morning air with jarring sharpness. Elijah looked up, meeting her gaze with a quiet steadiness that unsettled her despite herself. "Morning," he said evenly, the calm in his voice a deliberate contrast to her aggression. "You can't just put your boat in here," Karen continued, her tone rising slightly as she leaned into the confrontation. "This is private property. Lake Shelton belongs to our HOA community, and only members have the right to access it. I'm going to have to ask you to move your boat immediately." Elijah's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a flicker of disbelief mixed with a growing resolve crossing his features. "And you are?" he asked, his voice calm but firm, signaling that he was not intimidated. "Karen Whitmore," she replied, proudly, her chest lifting as though the very mention of her name carried unquestionable power. "President of the HOA, I don't recall seeing you at any of our meetings. Are you visiting someone here?" Elijah considered her carefully, noting the sharp edges of her certainty and the underlying insecurities she masked with bluster. "No," he said simply, "I'm just here to enjoy the lake." Karen's lips thinned, frustration breaking through her composure. "That's not how it works," she said, stepping closer with a warning in her voice. "If you don't move your boat, I'll call security or the sheriff." Elijah nodded slowly, a quiet smile playing on his lips, one that held the weight of experience and power far beyond what Karen understood. "You do what you think is best," he said softly, the calm in his tone unwavering, signaling that this was no ordinary dispute. This was the beginning of a reckoning. Within minutes, the tension escalated as Karen summoned reinforcements, her phone ringing off the hook as she called board members and local authorities to her side. 2 HOA board members arrived, their expressions a mix of curiosity and support, and shortly after, a sheriff's deputy pulled up in a cruiser, stepping out with measured professionalism. Deputy Rollins approached Elijah, requesting identification, and listening carefully as Elijah provided not only his driver's license, but also a set of documents few present had seen, legal deeds and ownership papers that proved beyond doubt what many had suspected but refused to acknowledge. The deputy's face shifted from polite formality to surprise as he reviewed the paperwork, then glanced at Karen, whose confident mask faltered. "Ma'am," the deputy said gently but firmly, "this man is Elijah Brooks. He is the legal owner of Lake Shelton and the 5 acres surrounding it." The room seemed to hold its breath as those words sank in, the implications reverberating through the community like a shockwave. Karen's face drained of color, disbelief and anger mingling in a storm of confusion. "That can't be," she stammered. "We've always used this lake. The HOA owns it." Elijah stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Not legally. My family purchased this land decades ago. Your developer made an arrangement for access, but that expired 5 years ago. I never renewed it." A heavy silence fell. The fishing club Karen had led with pride, the meetings she'd chaired, the bylaws she'd enforced, all now crumbled under the weight of truth. Karen grasped at straws. "But what about our community traditions, our bylaws?" Elijah shook his head gently. "Tradition does not override ownership. You've been trespassing for years, but I never cared until today." The clash of entitlement and rightful claim hung thick in the air, an invisible line drawn across the water. As Karen's face tightened with frustration and humiliation, Elijah turned back to the lake, the peace he sought interrupted but far from broken. In the quiet beauty of the moment, surrounded by the trees and the water, a new chapter was unfolding, one that would challenge old assumptions, demand respect, and reclaim what was his by right. And Elijah was ready for the battle ahead. The early morning sun cast a soft golden glow over Lake Shelton, a serene jewel nestled quietly in the midst of a sprawling suburban community that had grown rapidly in the last few decades. Elijah Brooks sat at the edge of the weathered wooden dock, a figure of quiet calm and deep contemplation as he prepared his fishing rod with practiced ease. This lake was more than a mere patch of water surrounded by homes. It was a sanctuary, a place where Elijah's childhood memories lay thick beneath the surface, like sediment shaped by time and experience. As a boy, he had spent countless hours here with his father, learning not only how to fish but also how to be patient, how to read the subtle signs of nature, and most importantly, how to find peace amid life's inevitable storms. The gentle rustling of the leaves, the distant call of a loon, and the smooth lap of waves against the dock created a melody that contrasted sharply with the chaotic demands of his present life as the CEO of a growing tech company. The endless cycle of meetings, emails, and deadlines in the city had left him craving moments like this, moments when he could sit quietly, breathe deeply, and remember who he was beneath the layers of responsibility and expectation. The lake, with its mirror-like surface reflecting the soft clouds drifting overhead, seemed to hold the power to pause time itself, offering sanctuary and clarity. Elijah's boat bobbed gently beside him, tethered securely to the dock, its hull catching glimmers of sunlight like scattered gems. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee brewing in nearby homes. This was his sacred space, a retreat from the world's noise and a reminder of roots that ran deeper than steel and glass skyscrapers. But even here, in this fragile haven, the quiet was about to be broken in a way Elijah had not anticipated. The sudden crunch of gravel beneath hurried footsteps shattered the delicate peace like a stone thrown into a still pond. Elijah's eyes lifted, catching sight of a figure striding toward the dock with an unmistakable aura of authority and entitlement. Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed president of the Lakeview Homeowners Association, was an embodiment of the very intrusion Elijah had hoped to avoid. She was impeccably dressed for a lakeside confrontation, with sun-bleached hair tightly pulled back, large sunglasses perched atop her head, and a clipboard gripped firmly in one hand as though it were a shield or a weapon. Her high-heeled sandals clicked sharply against the path, a sound that seemed jarringly out of place amid the natural symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves. Stopping abruptly beside Elijah, she crossed her arms and fixed him with a piercing glare that spoke volumes of her certainty and her disdain. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice cold and commanding as if she expected instant obedience. Elijah looked up slowly, returning her glare with steady, unflinching eyes. "Morning," he responded evenly, a calmness in his voice designed to diffuse rather than escalate. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line before she launched into her demand. "You can't just put your boat in here. This is private property. Lake Shelton belongs to the HOA and only members have the right to access it. I'm asking you to move your boat immediately." Elijah's gaze hardened slightly, his brow arching in silent challenge. "And you are?" he asked calmly, refusing to be intimidated. "Karen Whitmore," she answered proudly, "President of the Lakeview Homeowners Association. I don't recall seeing you at any meetings. Are you visiting someone here?" Elijah considered her, weighing the arrogance and ignorance that fueled her certainty. "No," he said simply. "I'm here to enjoy the lake." Karen's frustration was barely contained as she stepped closer, her voice growing sterner. "That's not how this works. If you don't remove your boat, I'll have to call security. Or the sheriff." Elijah nodded slowly, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You do what you think is best," he said softly, his calm masking a power and patience that Karen was yet to understand. What followed was a swift escalation that threw the community into turmoil. Karen wasted no time calling for backup, summoning board members and local law enforcement with an urgent insistence born of conviction and desperation. Soon 2 board members arrived, their faces a mixture of curiosity and alliance with Karen's stance. Then a sheriff's deputy pulled up in a cruiser, stepping out with a demeanor marked by impartial professionalism. Deputy Rollins approached Elijah, requesting his identification and listening carefully, as Elijah calmly provided not only his driver's license, but also a set of documents that caught everyone off guard, deeds and legal papers that unequivocally established Elijah's ownership of the lake and the surrounding 5 acres. The deputy's expression shifted as he scanned the documents, then turned to Karen with a look that mixed surprise and a silent warning. "Ma'am," he said quietly but firmly. "This man is Elijah Brooks. He is the legal owner of Lake Shelton." Karen's confident facade faltered as disbelief and anger swirled behind her eyes. "That can't be," she stammered, struggling to reconcile years of assumed control with the reality laid bare before her. "The HOA has always managed this lake." Elijah stepped forward, voice steady and resolute. "Your developer granted access years ago, but that agreement expired 5 years back. I chose not to renew it. This lake belongs to my family." A heavy silence settled over the crowd as the implications sank in. The fishing club Karen had proudly led, the HOA meetings she chaired, the rules she enforced, all were suddenly meaningless without Elijah's consent. Desperation edged into Karen's voice as she grasped for justifications rooted in tradition and community. But the bylaws, the community use, it's been this way for years. Elijah shook his head, gently, the weight of authority in his tone unmistakable. "Ownership is more than tradition. You've been trespassing on my property for years, but I tolerated it until now." The fragile peace of Lake Shelton had fractured under the pressure of entitlement and truth, the clash rippling through the community like the waves lapping the shoreline. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the scene in bright light, Elijah felt a profound shift in the air, a moment charged with history, justice, and a quiet determination to reclaim what was rightfully his. The water that had once offered solace now bore witness to a reckoning long overdue. Karen's posture stiffened with anger and humiliation, the thin veneer of control slipping away as the reality of her error settled in. Around them, neighbors and board members whispered in stunned disbelief, their assumptions challenged by the revelation of Elijah's rightful ownership. But Elijah did not gloat or gloat. Instead, he turned back to the lake, allowing the silence and the natural beauty to ground him once more. This was more than a dispute over land or a boat. It was a statement about respect, history, and dignity. The battle lines were drawn not just between individuals, but between the past and the future, between entitlement and rightful claim. In that moment, Elijah was ready to face whatever came next, to stand firm in the face of opposition, and to protect the legacy his family had built with quiet strength and unwavering resolve. The lake, serene and beautiful, held its breath, a silent witness to a man who would not be ignored, and to a community on the brink of transformation.